Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens, and his cell
I'll do
phone.
this and
Dark
then
Side of
goes
the
back.
Stream, episode 164. This week was Jay's pick.
Yeah.
And out of the blue, he brought to the table one that definitely intrigued me.
This is right up your alley.
It is. It's called Squaring the Circle, the story of hypnosis. If you are not familiar with the company Hypnosis, you probably are without knowing about it. They're an art design group based out of London who were friends with a bunch of the guys that started Pink Floyd and would go on to help create some of the most iconic record covers of all time in the rock world for Pink Floyd, Def Leppard, T-Rex, Black Sabbath, Bad Company, Led Zeppelin, AC/DC, Paul McCartney and Wings.
They were the guys.
Alan Parsons Project, who we just discussed. Yes. Genesis, ELO. It goes on and on and on. But it's a pretty cool story about how they started out. And if you are an art guy, if you are a record collector like me, if you're a fan of any of those bands I mentioned, you have to watch this documentary.
Yeah, they made some of the most iconic album covers of all time.
As much as I hate Oasis and the brothers Gallagher,
great
he actually, one of them that's in it, had something really cool to say about record covers and how they were the poor man's art. And he's absolutely right. I mean, you go from like the 50s and 60s where mainly almost all album covers just featured the front man or the group, whatever good looking person from the band they could put on the cover. And then around the late 50s, early 60s, something started to happen in the world of jazz where instead of just having the sax player, they would use art as the cover.
Oh, so it started in jazz.
Specific. Well, yeah. If you look at when the trend kind of started, where art kind of started to, and I mean visual art, that is, started to kind of get into the music world. It obviously happened in classic music because you would see, like, for example, The Rites of Spring, right? There would be a painting based off of that, and they'd say, we're doing The Rites of Spring, and it's the London Symphonic Orchestra, and the record would have that painting on it. It, I guess, would technically have really started with classical in that regard, but with popular music, and at the time, late 50s, early 60s, jazz was in that genre.
And in the correlation with the rise of reefer.
Well, that too. They would bring in art, and Gets Gilberto, great cover. It's a painting. So the idea that you would take paintings and put them on the record cover isn't a new thing. It wasn't that Hypnosis came up with this, but what's interesting is that they were the ones that took it and ran with it.
Yeah.
And
we're just kind of like just throwing stuff at the wall and see what sticks.
Well, it goes without saying that
all right, cool.
A lot of the bands that we love, more specifically like Pink Floyd, a lot of those dudes, they went to school to be artists. They wanted to be artists, and while they were going to some weird art institute in London or UK in general,
met a guy that plays guitar.
They met some dude who played, and they started a band, and then they dropped out of school and they became millionaires making records. Well, not everyone had that luck. These guys just happened to know those guys, and when they all needed album covers, said, "Hey, I know a guy that might be able to do this," and that's where it all started.
They just figured it out as they were doing it,
and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah,
we'll talk more about that next. Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave. Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens in the studio, Dark Side of the Stream, episode 164 today, discussing Squaring the Circle, the story of Hypnosis. Before we go any further, what's your favorite album cover of all time? Do you have one?
Ooh. Yeah, and I think you're going to say it's stereotypical, Jay, but I think I'm going to go with Shout at the Devil.
What, just the pentagram?
Just the pentagram, because, dude,
the lowest hanging fruit of all time.
I knew you were going to say that. but dude, you grab that album, and it's just like, it feels like this is so amazing what I'm going to, it seems like so wrong and so scary.
Well, yeah, I mean, at the time, that's a pentagram, dude.
You drop that, and the album's called Shout at the Devil. That's pretty.
What's it associated
epic,
with?
Well, yeah, the devil, right? So it's like you feel like that was a lot of cojones to put that on an album.
Interesting.
Cover,
I wonder if even made. Nope, it didn't make the top 100, at least according to Billboard. But on this again, it's subjective, and they've got the.
I mean, what's the most
Velvet
iconic one though? If you want me to say what's probably the most iconic, I'm going to sell probably that Pink Floyd Dark Side
It's
of
the
the
Dark
Moon.
Side
It's
of the Moon.
probably
Yeah,
the most.
it's
If you think of an iconic album cover, you know,
Yeah.
you're going to think of that one. I
the
think.
sales of that record definitely helped that, though.
Yeah, that's the problem. It goes hand in hand, I feel like.
the idea that that band was just not only about the music, but there were also a lot of visuals that went along with that too. There, at least according to Billboard, top record cover of all time was the Velvet Underground and Nico, the Andy Warhol
With
with
just
the
a
banana pin
banana?
appeal.
I see now.
I don't
That's
know how
real
that.
weird too.
Number 2 is Abbey Road.
I would say Sergeant Pepper's
It's a
would be
good
a good
one.
one. You know, 'cause
I
that
was talking
collage.
about this. Someone had gotten a Beatles tattoo, and what they got was the revolver, the drawing one.
Well,
That's probably
cool.
one of my
That's pretty
favorites.
cool.
They got Patti Smith's Horses as number 3. That's garbage. I'm not even gonna.
Right, that list is weird.
No.
That Zeppelin one.
They got
is
Zeppelin
good,
1
but
is the
it's just
best
a
Zeppelin.
picture, you
Zeppelin
know?
1 isn't even the best Led
Right,
Zeppelin. They got Dark
yeah.
Side of the Moon is number 6, so it's garbage.
It's garbage.
But I wanted to kind of go through this and see.
Rage Against the Machine has a good, you know, but it's also a news.
But that's
picture,
a historic photo.
Right.
You know, it's all subjective. My favorite album cover I have is actually a bootleg cover of a Sleep concert recorded in 2018 in New York City, and it's a photo of Kurt Russell.
What date was it recorded?
2018.
What date? You got so in details. I know that there's a. I
there's
wanted
a
you to
date
go to
on
the
it.
date
I don't remember what the date
because
is.
you got so that was so many details.
The only
just
reason
now.
I know that is because I went to that tour. It was the only time I've seen Sleep. It was amazing. It was so good. And then they pressed like 400 of these bootlegs. They were not cheap. But the reason I bought it was because of the cover. And going back to what I said about being art pieces, I am a huge Kurt Russell fan. I am a huge John Carpenter fan. And on the cover of this record is a picture of Kurt Russell as Snake Plissken, and they photoshopped a Black Sabbath t-shirt on him.
Dude.
It's probably one of the most coolest things I have in my house. I love that cover, and I bought that, and I paid a lot of money for that specific album, not only because I was on the tour, but because I viewed it as a piece of art that I would hang in my house. It bootlegged. It's so bad. It's awesome. I love it so much. But
I remember in high school, my buddy bought the Cinderella album just based off of not hearing the band, just based
covers.
off of the cover
I'm sure millions of
and
people
what
did
the
that.
band looked like. And
Yeah.
then we looked at a list of songs, and Hell on Wheels was like one of the songs. And he goes, "I'm buying this." Like, all right, cool.
I had one of my favorite bands from the 90s, Karate, and no one's ever heard of. A friend of mine, Allison, she was in can't remember the record store's name in St. Louis, Vintage Vinyl, and was just walking around and saw this cover and saw the name of the band and goes, it looks interesting. Grabbed it, took it home, listened to it, was like, whoa, this is good. Sent it to me. And I was like, oh my God, this is like 90s Steely Dan. I love this. And same thing. That happened a million times. Doesn't really happen anymore. Now you get in because of TikTok videos.
I thought you mentioned the Oasis thing. I thought it was interesting at the end. It had him with a quote saying, you know, he told his daughter, "Sorry, I was late coming home because we were having a meeting about the artwork." And she goes, "What do you mean the artwork?" And he goes, "You know that little picture on iTunes that you see?" She goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, that's the artwork." She goes, "There was a meeting about that?" And he goes, "Yeah, and it cost like $100,000.
Yeah. But even then, again, you already said it. Back then, how do you get people? How do you sell that without any airplay or anything? A kid just walking through the record store going like this, they see a pentagram, they're like, "Oh my God, this is so dangerous. I want this." Or whatever the case may be, Santana put in a naked chick on the cover. Either way, that would, in essence, help sell records when they weren't getting radio play. And it's just another version of TikTok or YouTube streams that these people don't have. Back in the day, more specifically with Hypnosis, the first album cover they did for Floyd was A Saucer Full of Secrets, and that cover is not great at all. I mean, I think they did it in his bathroom.
Out what they were doing.
Yeah, they did it in dude's bathroom, and so then they eventually found out that they needed to kind of up the ante, and that's when they got a lot of success with the Dark Side of the Moon cover. But again, now kids don't even think about the cover anymore.
And then Zeppelin, they jumped on board with those guys, and that was it. Then they just took off, and they were just making money.
And they were the guy and at that point, it wasn't that they were spending as much in the recording, but Getty in his biography, the only reason I talk about this is because I just finished it. But in the 80s, when he's talking about videos Rush were doing, he was like, in some cases, they were willing to give us more of a budget for the music video than they were for the entire production of the record.
Wow.
So it's all relative, and ultimately it's a way to sell your album. And we'll talk more about it next. Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7. Mike, the intern, Jay Stevens, back in the studio, Dark Side of the Stream, episode 164, Squaring the Circle, the story of hypnosis. Now, we've talked about the commercial reason that these guys did what they did. I talk a lot about sound signature. For example, you're listening or you're watching Lethal Weapon and you hear that guitar playing, that's Eric Clapton. Like you can hear his tone, you know who that is, or you might be like, I know that tone. I know who that is. That's Eric Clapton, right? Santana starts playing a solo. It's Santana. David Gilmour, when he starts playing a solo, everyone has their own specific sound. Hypnosis, as well, in my opinion, has a specific look. When you look at the album covers they created, that it's Hypnosis. Division Bell, that. I mean, obviously, because they were tied with Pink Floyd, every record they did was them. But the big Grandoy, the all the beds, the hospital beds laying on the beach, right? And the guy sitting there, and that huge shot, right, for Momentary Lapse of Reason. It's so iconic. Slip, Stitch, and Pass from Fish, a guy running down a beach with a giant yarn ball running behind him, right? Mars Volta, Delirium, and that record, also Hypnosis. You can tell at least I can, when I see it visually, I'm like, I think Hypnosis did that cover almost always. Am I right? You can see.
I mean, that's great, man. Good for those guys.
But again, they found their style, and again, it's largely photography oriented, but they do so good about using little things to make them bigger, smaller things. The Presence album gets a lot of flack, but I think it's a cool concept, but it's always in the eye of the beholder. You know what I mean? It just is. And they're not all winners. Dirty Deeds done dirt cheap, right? The picture of all those people with their eyes blacked out. I could have looked at it and not told you that was Hypnosis. I know it is because of this film.
Wild, man.
But
yeah, it was great, man. Just seeing these, I like stories like that. Guys that kind of came from nothing and figured out their own path, and then usually stuff goes wrong and somebody steals the money, and like that's how they go.
Well, yeah, and drugs get involved and all this stuff. And again,
somebody's not talking to somebody anymore.
You look at their amount of work, starting with the Saucerful of Secrets with Floyd in '68, and really the last big one that they did was Been Out of Shape with Rainbow, but they did Coda for Zeppelin, Eye in the Sky. They were the ones who did that. Man. I mean, they had their hand in popular music for a better part of 20 years, and some of the biggest selling records were created by this company. So that has to tell you something. Eventually, they would go in the opposite direction and kind of go back to the way it was done in the late 50s and 60s or whatever, when you put the guys on the band, because what was happening around the beginning of the 80s,
visuals, bands,
it went back to the bands, it went back to the front man or whoever's got the hair, it went back to that stuff. Ozzy dressed up like a werewolf, all that stuff. I mean, this stuff is all cycles, and that's what you're seeing. But it was a pretty cool time period, in my opinion, and the documentary itself tells a really cool story about two guys that just figured it out as they went along, and just because of who they knew, it worked out in their benefit. It's also a great example of find what you love, and you will never work a day in your life.
Just find what you love and figure out how to make money doing that.
That's the way it is. We will be back with our reviews of this documentary next. Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The K. Mike, the intern, Jay Stevens, back in the studio. Dark Side of the Stream, episode 164, Squaring the Circle, the story of hypnosis. So how many record covers would you give this?
4 record covers.
Straight up 4, big time. Yeah. And again,
great. I learned something. I didn't know, they were who these guys were. I know their album covers.
And now you know.
Now I know.
And now you know.
Now I know the story. It was good. It was nice.
And kids, if you are into collecting records, these are some great album covers you should pick up. The albums are themselves great, but once you get to that point now, even though I still obviously collect records, my next big thing right now is I'm show posters, big time, which I think that has now become a big, not only draw, but a centerpiece of art for bands, especially when you go to shows. Primus, for example, will do 200 limit, but they're all created by a local artist. They're all print, hand numbered, signed. That's pretty cool. That's what I go for. I don't buy shirts anymore. If they have vinyls I don't have, I'll probably buy that. But more times than not, I want that show poster, and that's all I want. It's the best way to remember. Because what happens to your shirt? You lose it. You end up ripping the sleeves off.
Leave it at some chick's house.
Leave it at some chick steals it from you.
Yep.
Because you never called her back. You left it over there.
Yep.
That's where your Shadow of the Dervish shirt went, man. It's gone. But either way, great documentary. Next week, it's my pick, and we are going to do a very cool series that is on Paramount Plus. Geddy Lee, who right now is my man because I just finished his biography, and I cannot tell you how amazing it is. I don't even care if you really like Rush. If you just like music in general, get this book. It's so good. It is so good. The show is called Our Bass Player's Human 2. It's on Paramount Plus. 4 episodes where he talks to the bass player from Nirvana. He talks to Les Claypool of Primus. He talks to, Flea? I believe, you know what? I don't know. I don't think he did Flea. Rob Trujillo from Metallica, and the same bass player from the Smashing Pumpkins and Hole too. So get a female perspective of that too. Right. But you get to see.
Now, I don't have Paramount Plus.
You get to see Les Claypool teach Geddy Lee on how to use a backhoe. Wow, which is awesome. To me. I think it's awesome.
Are you going to give me your mom's password for Paramount Plus?
You're going to have to. Thanks, Mom. As always, you can stream these online at 1047thecave.com or as a free podcast on our 104.7 The Cave app. Watch us make fools of ourselves every Thursday, 9 a.m. or 6 p.m. on Jay's show. You can watch it live on Facebook or YouTube. I am Mike the Intern. That's Jay Stevens reminding you we watch movies so you don't have to. It's Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave.